On July 14, 2025, just after 9:30 a.m. in Montecito, California, something routine reportedly turned tense. A delivery vehicle stopped outside a gated estate on Riven Rock Road. The driver carried a thin envelope. No cameras were present, no announcement followed. But according to people familiar with the matter, what arrived that morning would trigger a chain of events still unfolding. From the outside, everything looked unchanged. The hillside property sat quiet behind tall hedges. Security vehicles were parked at their usual distance. Neighbors noticed nothing unusual, yet sources close to the situation say the document inside that envelope raised immediate concern. It was not a contract offer or royalty statement. It was a notice tied to insurance coverage on the property, dated July 13, 2025, with a 24-hour response window. The location matters. Montecito sits in a high-risk wildfire zone. Insurance coverage there is not optional. It is a requirement written into most mortgage agreements, especially for properties valued above $10 million. According to people familiar with California lending practices, a lapse in coverage can trigger default clauses faster than missed payments. That detail would soon become central. Within an hour, calls were reportedly placed to financial advisors on both sides of the Atlantic. By late morning, attention had shifted from California to London, specifically to Kensington Palace. Sources indicate that a request was made for short-term financial support described as a bridge, not a gift. The figure discussed was precise: $36 million. The purpose was limited: stabilize coverage, prevent escalation, buy time. What happened next is where accounts begin to converge. According to individuals with knowledge of royal financial protocols, Prince William reviewed the request alongside documentation outlining existing liabilities. This was not an emotional exchange, it was procedural. As Duke of Cornwall, William oversees a large portfolio with strict governance rules. Requests of this scale are not approved casually. By early evening in London, the answer had reportedly been delivered. It was not delayed, it was not softened. The request was denied. No funds would be transferred, no temporary coverage arranged, no guarantees offered. The decision, according to sources, was final. That refusal marked a shift. What had been a private concern became a structural problem. Without immediate coverage, lenders could act. Without external support, options narrowed quickly. This raised a question that has not been publicly addressed. Why would a request of this urgency be rejected outright, despite the personal relationship involved? The answer, according to those watching closely, lies not in that single morning, but in a pattern leading up to it. What followed would expose financial pressures, strained alliances, and decisions made years earlier that were now coming due. To understand why that request failed, it helps to step back several years. The financial structure surrounding Prince Harry did not change overnight. It evolved through a series of choices that at the time appeared manageable. According to people familiar with the transition period following his departure from royal duties in 2020, early projections assumed steady income streams and controlled expenses. Those assumptions did not hold. After relocating to North America, the household adopted a cost structure more common to high-profile private citizens than working royals. Security alone reportedly ran into the millions annually. Housing costs escalated quickly. Staff, travel, public relations, and legal fees added further pressure. None of this was secret. Advisors on both sides of the Atlantic were aware. What mattered was whether incoming revenue would keep pace. Initially, optimism prevailed. Media contracts were announced with headline numbers that suggested long-term stability. According to individuals familiar with entertainment industry practices, those figures were often misunderstood by the public. Large sums were discussed, but much of the money was structured as advances tied to performance benchmarks. Payments depended on delivery, timelines, and audience response. That distinction would become important later. By mid-2022, warning signs reportedly began to surface. Sources close to financial advisors say cash flow became uneven. Expenses remained fixed, but income arrived in bursts. This is manageable with sufficient reserves. It becomes risky when reserves shrink. At the same time, lifestyle expectations did not scale down. Travel continued at premium levels. Staffing levels remained high. The property itself required constant investment. According to real estate professionals familiar with estates in Santa Barbara County, properties of that size behave less like homes and more like infrastructure projects. Maintenance is continuous. Systems age quickly. Landscaping alone can cost tens of thousands each month, especially in drought conditions requiring specialized water management. These are predictable costs, but they are relentless. By early 2023, some advisors reportedly urged reassessment. The recommendation, according to people familiar with those conversations, was not drastic. It involved downsizing, restructuring security, and slowing discretionary spending. These suggestions were said to be poorly received. The belief remained that future deals would correct temporary strain. Around the same period, relationships that had previously provided informal support began to shift. Sources indicate that some allies grew cautious. Assistance that once flowed easily became conditional. This was not framed as rejection. It was framed as accountability. Requests for transparency increased. Questions were asked about burn rate and long-term planning. Within royal circles, similar concerns had been raised earlier. According to individuals familiar with internal discussions, Prince William had expressed reservations about large fixed assets outside the United Kingdom. His concerns were reportedly practical, not personal. He questioned exposure to volatile markets, legal jurisdictions, and insurance environments unfamiliar to the royal system. These concerns were not acted upon at the time. The prevailing view was that independence required autonomy even if it involved risk. That principle guided decisions through 2024, but risk compounds. By late 2024, according to people with knowledge of the situation, liabilities had grown while flexibility had declined. This brings the focus back to the Duchy of Cornwall. As its current steward, Prince William is bound by fiduciary obligations. Funds are not discretionary in the way personal wealth might be. They are managed under rules designed to protect future generations and public trust. Any transfer of that scale requires justification beyond family ties. When the request arrived in July 2025, it did not land in isolation. It landed on top of years of data. According to sources, documentation reviewed included outstanding obligations, projected expenses, and previous warnings. The picture that emerged was not of a short-term gap, but of a recurring imbalance. This is where the pattern becomes relevant. The first instance raised mild concern. The second suggested strain. By the third, those involved reportedly saw consistency, repeated reliance on external support, repeated deferral of structural change. According to financial analysts familiar with similar cases, that combination signals systemic risk. So when the request was framed as temporary, it was evaluated against a longer history. People familiar with the decision say the conclusion was straightforward. Providing funds would delay consequences, not resolve them. It would extend exposure, not reduce it. That assessment reframed the issue. What looked like an urgent family matter became a governance decision. And once framed that way, the outcome was predictable. What followed would test relationships further and draw in parties far beyond the family itself. The central development unfolded over the next 72 hours. According to people familiar with the timeline, lenders were alerted almost immediately once the insurance issue surfaced. This was not discretionary. Mortgage contracts for properties above $12 million typically include automatic notification protocols. When coverage status changes, the lender knows. That process reportedly began the same afternoon. By July 15, 2025, internal risk teams at the lending institution were said to be reviewing the file. Sources with knowledge of standard procedures say this review would have focused on three numbers: the outstanding loan balance, the replacement cost of the structure, and the time elapsed without confirmed coverage. In this case, the window was narrow. 24 hours can be enough to escalate. This is where authority enters the picture. According to people familiar with U.S. banking compliance, large lenders operate under federal risk guidelines monitored by the Treasury Department and subject to audit. Deviations are flagged quickly. No special treatment applies regardless of borrower profile. Title does not change underwriting math. Documents reportedly reviewed during this period included the original mortgage agreement dated August 18, 2020. That agreement allegedly contained a default clause triggered by insurance lapse. It did not require missed payments. It did not require notice. It required exposure. Once exposure existed, action was permitted. At the same time, insurers were reassessing the property. California's wildfire map had been updated earlier that summer. According to industry analysts, several insurers exited high-risk zones entirely between May and June 2025. Replacement policies were scarce. When available, they required upfront premiums. Sources familiar with comparable estates say those premiums can exceed $400,000 annually, payable in advance. This is where liquidity became critical. Without immediate cash, options narrowed to two: secure force-placed insurance through the lender at elevated rates or reduce exposure by selling the asset. Force-placed insurance is not designed to protect the owner. It protects the bank. It is expensive and unforgiving. According to people familiar with communications during this period, advisors laid out these options plainly. There was no ambiguity. The situation had moved from inconvenience to risk. That shift happened quietly. No press statements were issued. No denials circulated. Silence prevailed. The absence of a public response became notable. When high-profile figures face financial rumors, they often issue swift clarifications. Legal teams respond. Statements are drafted. Here none appeared. According to observers familiar with crisis management, silence under these conditions suggests active containment, not dismissal. Behind the scenes, additional information was reportedly shared with Prince William. Sources indicate that updated figures showed cumulative obligations exceeding earlier estimates. These included security contracts, legal retainers, and projected maintenance costs. One number reportedly stood out: a projected 12-month outflow exceeding $18 million, assuming no asset sale. Think about that for a moment. Even with new income, that level of fixed expense creates pressure. It limits maneuverability. It increases reliance on advances. According to financial analysts, this is how short-term solutions become long-term traps. What made this moment different was timing. The insurance lapse did not occur in a vacuum. It coincided with other developments. According to individuals familiar with entertainment contracts, discussions around underperformance and deliverables had intensified earlier that month. Cash inflows expected for late summer were uncertain. This convergence raised the stakes. What had once been a manageable narrative of independence now faced scrutiny from institutions that do not trade in narratives. Banks enforce contracts. Insurers price risk. Treasury guidelines demand compliance. According to people familiar with the decision process, this is when the refusal solidified. The question was no longer whether to help, but whether helping would expose the duchy to secondary liability. Once that possibility existed, the answer was effectively predetermined. By the evening of July 16, 2025, the situation had escalated beyond private negotiation. External parties were now involved. The issue was no longer just about one property. It was about precedent, responsibility, and whether repeated intervention had created dependency. This was not the first time a warning had been issued. It was the first time those warnings aligned with enforceable consequences. And when patterns meet enforcement, outcomes tend to follow. After the immediate crisis window passed, the focus shifted to mitigation and containment. Sources familiar with the matter indicate that a combination of internal audits and external advisories took over. The goal was twofold: prevent financial exposure from escalating and preserve reputational integrity. One critical step reportedly involved reconciling outstanding obligations. Accountants and financial managers were said to have reviewed invoices, contracts, and escrow accounts. They aimed to identify any gaps between projected expenses and available liquidity. According to industry insiders, this kind of reconciliation can take days, sometimes weeks, depending on complexity. In this case, time was compressed due to ongoing media attention and internal risk assessments. Simultaneously, advisors explored alternative funding options. Private loans, temporary lines of credit, and asset-backed advances were all evaluated. Sources indicate that the feasibility of each option depended on collateral value, market conditions, and institutional willingness to assume risk. Here, the insurance lapse played a key role. Without continuous coverage, lenders were reluctant to extend additional credit, reducing flexibility. Another layer involved legal considerations. Attorneys reviewed contractual obligations, default clauses, and regulatory compliance. According to legal experts familiar with similar cases, this step ensures that any action taken does not inadvertently trigger additional liability. In high-profile estates, even minor missteps can lead to scrutiny from multiple jurisdictions. During this period, internal communication reportedly intensified. Teams coordinated across different offices, sometimes spanning multiple countries. Decision-making relied on a centralized timeline of obligations and risk triggers. According to insiders, such centralization helps prevent contradictory directives, a common problem when multiple advisors are involved. Meanwhile, contingency planning continued. Scenarios ranged from temporary cash injections to partial liquidation of assets. Each option was weighed against potential reputational and financial consequences. Analysts note that in high-net-worth cases, non-financial factors, such as public perception and precedent, can carry as much weight as numbers on a balance sheet. Finally, all parties reportedly monitored external reporting. Media outlets had begun to note discrepancies in coverage and obligations. According to crisis management consultants, this phase is critical. Public narratives can shape the behavior of institutions, investors, and partners. By maintaining control over information, advisors aim to prevent reactive measures that could worsen exposure. By the close of this stage, the window for emergency intervention had largely passed. Immediate risk had not disappeared, but it was contained. What remained was a longer-term strategy to stabilize finances, address obligations, and rebuild flexibility. According to insiders, this stage often defines whether temporary setbacks evolve into enduring problems or remain manageable incidents. The fallout from the financial freeze began to ripple outward, reaching not just advisors but public perception and industry circles. Observers noted that the atmosphere surrounding the estate had changed dramatically. Sources familiar with the environment say that staff morale dipped, operational efficiency dropped, and small issues became magnified under scrutiny. Even minor lapses, missed deliveries, or delayed maintenance reportedly sparked concern among management. Public attention also increased. Analysts point out that in high-profile households, even neutral actions are interpreted as signals. A car parked in a different location, a gate left open, or a shift in security personnel can be read as a sign of instability. According to insiders, this visibility adds pressure that compounds existing financial stress, creating a cycle of reactive decisions rather than strategic ones. Meanwhile, silence became a powerful tool and a telling indicator. No official statements were issued in response to media reports. Sources note that in similar situations, public figures often release clarifications or denials immediately. The absence of such communication here suggested either strategic restraint or acknowledgement of the issues raised. Analysts familiar with crisis management describe silence in these cases as a signal that the situation is more serious than publicly acknowledged. Industry commentary began to emerge. Media executives, entertainment advisors, and former estate managers provided insights into the unfolding scenario. While no names were officially attached, discussions included the financial implications of missed deliverables, the risk associated with asset mismanagement, and the reputational consequences of unresolved obligations. The consensus reportedly emphasized that recovery requires not only liquidity, but also trust and credibility restoration. Social circles also responded. Invitations to key industry events were reportedly rescinded or quietly modified. Observers familiar with elite networks noted that such changes are subtle but significant, reflecting both caution and strategic distancing. The message to the household, according to these insiders, was clear. Perceived instability has consequences beyond balance sheets. It affects alliances, opportunities, and influence. Even advisors admitted that the ongoing pressure was testing both operational and emotional endurance. Sources describe extended strategy sessions, continuous monitoring of external reports, and high-stakes discussions about contingency actions. Every decision was said to be weighed not just financially, but for its signal to partners, lenders, and observers. By the end of this period, the environment had shifted from immediate crisis to sustained tension. Risk had not diminished, and the public perception of instability continued to grow. Those close to the situation reportedly began preparing for the next wave. Strategic asset management, recalibrated relationships, and potentially irreversible consequences for both financial stability and public image. As the consequences of the financial standoff became apparent, the stakes escalated sharply. Legal and institutional pressure began to mount, creating a scenario that insiders describe as unprecedented for someone in the Sussex position. According to sources familiar with the matter, the potential for litigation, contractual breaches, and foreclosure risk was becoming unavoidable. The combination of unpaid obligations, lapsing insurance, and looming clawback clauses reportedly created a perfect storm of liability. Financial analysts familiar with high-value estates say that a property like Riven Rock, with its $14.65 million valuation, 9 bedrooms, 16 bathrooms, and extensive grounds, is extraordinarily costly to maintain even under ideal conditions. Annual property taxes alone reportedly exceeding $200,000, combined with utilities, landscaping, and security, create recurring obligations that demand constant liquidity. When revenue streams falter, as with the reported Netflix and Tyler Perry gaps, the estate can become a financial sinkhole almost instantly. Insiders also describe professional consequences beyond the immediate monetary impact. Advisors, collaborators, and production partners reportedly began distancing themselves, wary of further association with the uncertainty. Sources indicate that this pattern is consistent with high-profile individuals whose cash flow becomes unstable. Networks that once offered support quietly disengage to protect their own reputations. In this instance, Hollywood influence appears to have shifted decisively. Legally, the situation was equally severe. Mortgage clauses, particularly the default due to insurance lapse, reportedly left no room for negotiation. Analysts say that lenders can enforce foreclosure immediately without waiting for missed monthly payments to protect their collateral. This mechanism turned a routine insurance issue into a potential existential threat for the estate. Combined with ongoing contractual clawbacks from entertainment deals, the legal exposure reportedly compounded daily. The implications for personal relationships were equally stark. Sources familiar with internal communications describe tension and frustration spilling into interactions with friends, associates, and extended family. Strategic alliances were reportedly tested, and the social ecosystem surrounding the household began to fray. One source said that even minor requests for support were now subject to intense scrutiny, with little patience for mismanagement. Financial observers describe this as a cascade failure scenario. When one support system collapses, others quickly follow. In this case, the combination of lender pressure, Hollywood clawbacks, and diminished private backing created a situation where every decision had immediate and escalating consequences. Those close to the matter reportedly began preparing for asset liquidation, risk mitigation, and potential legal action. By the time the latest communications concluded, it became clear that the American experiment was reaching a critical juncture. Sources indicate that the decision to sell the estate quietly through a pocket listing was not merely a preference but a strategic necessity. Delays or missteps could trigger further financial exposure, reputational damage, and potentially irreversible legal consequences. The weight of these combined pressures was reportedly felt in every meeting, every phone call, and every financial review, underscoring the severity of the stakes. As the dust began to settle on the immediate fallout, the current status of the Sussex situation revealed a precarious and unresolved picture. According to sources familiar with the matter, Harry and Meghan were reportedly operating under extreme constraints, forced to make critical decisions while under the intense scrutiny of both financial and social pressures. Their liquidity was reportedly stretched thin, with every expenditure weighed against the possibility of triggering further obligations or losses. One key unanswered question is how long they can maintain even basic operations without additional support. Reports indicate that the pocket listing for Riven Rock is active, yet discreet, and finding a buyer willing to cover the asking price without the media catching wind remains a significant challenge. Insiders suggest that the estate's unique size and complexity have already narrowed the pool of potential buyers. Sources say that the couple is reportedly exploring foreign investors and syndicate arrangements to move the property quickly while avoiding public exposure. Another uncertainty revolves around security logistics. Previously, a heavily armed team, reportedly consisting of former SAS officers and top-tier protection specialists, managed the perimeter. Sources indicate that the withdrawal of these high-level personnel was an early signal of financial strain. Now, local security firms reportedly oversee the property, a competent but less imposing force, raising questions about both safety and optics. The third major question concerns ongoing contractual obligations. Reports suggest that Netflix and other content partners have yet to finalize settlements or reclaim advances, leaving the couple in a state of suspended financial risk. The timing and outcome of these clawback claims could dramatically alter their available liquidity, potentially forcing more drastic decisions in the short term. Insiders with direct knowledge also highlight the uncertainty surrounding interpersonal dynamics. The relationship with Tyler Perry, once a pillar of support, has reportedly shifted from generous assistance to cautious disengagement. This reportedly leaves the couple without the private financial buffer that previously softened up. Chanel and social pressures, further escalating the stakes for each move they make. Additionally, long-term implications for public perception remain unresolved. Observers suggest that Hollywood and the broader media ecosystem are closely monitoring every development. With every delay or misstep, sources indicate the couple risks further reputational erosion, which could have cascading effects on their future ventures and alliances. Finally, the broader question looming over the situation is strategic. What comes after Riven Rock? With no immediate plans for relocation publicly disclosed, insiders indicate that the couple faces the dual challenge of securing a new residence while managing both privacy and security. Each potential solution reportedly carries significant financial, legal, and reputational consequences, leaving the American experiment in a state of fragile uncertainty. Sources close to the situation reportedly continue to monitor each step. The sale of the estate, ongoing contractual disputes, and shifting support structures suggest a timeline where decisions must be made quickly and carefully. The combination of unresolved questions, financial pressure, and strategic vulnerability paints a picture that is far from stable, leaving observers, insiders, and the public alike wondering what the next chapter will bring. As the weeks pass, the strategic closing of this saga begins to take shape, though resolution remains elusive. Observers familiar with royal and Hollywood dynamics indicate that the Sussexes are navigating a landscape where every choice is scrutinized, every move potentially consequential. Sources say that the decisions made in the coming months will not only define their personal trajectory, but also signal broader lessons about wealth, influence, and accountability. Even with Riven Rock on the market, insiders suggest the couple is in a transitional limbo. Each day that passes without a confirmed buyer reportedly increases both financial strain and reputational exposure. Multiple sources indicate that the couple is actively weighing offers from overseas investors, aiming to liquidate the property discreetly to avoid drawing attention. Yet every step carries risk. Public awareness could accelerate media speculation, potentially creating legal and social complications that might have been avoidable. The patterns identified throughout this ordeal continue to emerge. Once again, a reliance on external support, Tyler Perry, Netflix, and other benefactors, reveals the fragility of the Sussex financial ecosystem. Observers point to repeated miscalculations, a reliance on goodwill, and delayed responses as factors that have contributed to the current precarious position. When viewed in sequence, these incidents suggest a systematic issue. Resources were consumed faster than they were replenished, creating vulnerabilities that were predictable but insufficiently addressed. Silence remains a telling element. Neither the Sussexes nor their representatives have publicly clarified the financial realities or disputed the narrative of the pocket listing and property sale. Sources familiar with internal discussions interpret this absence of public statement as a tacit acknowledgement of the situation's gravity. In similar high-profile cases, timely responses often mitigate scrutiny, but here, the prolonged silence amplifies questions rather than quelling them. The escalating stakes are apparent. Reports indicate that legal advisors are actively monitoring contractual obligations with streaming platforms, while financial consultants are recalibrating liquidity strategies. Each delay or uncertainty reportedly carries compounding consequences, from potential litigation to intensified media coverage. Observers note that in this environment, any misstep could trigger a cascade effect, heightening both financial and reputational risk. From a strategic perspective, the implications extend beyond the immediate sale of a property or repayment of debts. Analysts suggest that the lessons of the Sussex American experiment serve as a cautionary tale. Independence from a structured support system carries not just financial risk, but social, logistical, and reputational consequences. Insiders indicate that the coming months will test resilience, judgment, and resourcefulness, as the couple navigates a world where privilege offers no automatic shield from accountability. As of now, multiple developments remain unresolved. Who ultimately acquires Riven Rock? How will contractual clawbacks unfold? Will Hollywood re-engage or continue to distance itself? Sources close to the matter reportedly continue to observe quietly, aware that each decision will reverberate far beyond Montecito. The final chapter has yet to be written, and insiders suggest that the implications could redefine both personal and public perceptions of the Sussexes for years to come. In the end, the story underscores a singular truth: wealth, fame, and titles do not immunize anyone from the consequences of their decisions. Prince William's refusal to provide a $36 million bailout, the withdrawal of external support, and the financial realities of Riven Rock combine into a narrative that is as instructive as it is cautionary. For the Sussexes, the road ahead remains long, uncertain, and fraught with challenges that no privilege can easily overcome. Observers, insiders, and the public alike remain on watch, understanding that the unfolding chapters may reveal more than just financial lessons. They may reveal fundamental truths about independence, accountability, and the cost of choices made under pressure. This story continues with every detail of the sale, every contractual settlement, and every strategic move observed closely. Those watching closely know that the narrative has only just begun. As the sun sets over Montecito, one image lingers: a couple facing the stark reality of decisions that cannot be undone, a test of resilience in a world where freedom is measured not by titles, but by the ability to sustain the life one chooses.